A vibrant stage, thousands of fans screaming, and three brothers harmonizing in perfect unison, their voices weaving together like threads of pure gold. The Bee Gees weren't just a band. They were a phenomenon, a family who conquered the world with their music. But behind the glittering facade of fame, behind the falsetto harmonies that defined an entire generation, lay secrets so profound that even now, 13 years after Robin Gibb's death, they're only beginning to surface. His children have remained silent for over a decade, guarding truths that would shock even the most devoted fans. But now, the silence has been broken. What they're revealing will forever change how we remember one of music's greatest icons. Robin Hugh Gibb was born on December 22, 1949, arriving into the world just minutes after his twin brother Maurice, in Douglas, Isle of Man. From that first breath, Robin was destined to share his life with someone else, to exist as part of something greater than himself. His voice, even as a child, carried a distinctive vibrato, a haunting quality that would later become his signature. Growing up in a musical household where melodies floated through the air like oxygen itself, Robin and his brothers Barry and Maurice formed an unbreakable bond, not just as siblings, but as musical collaborators who would eventually revolutionize popular music. The Gibb family emigrated to Australia in 1958, where the brothers' musical journey truly began. They performed at local speedways, shopping centers, anywhere that would have them, honing their craft and developing the harmonies that would later captivate millions. Young Robin, with his piercing blue eyes and serious demeanor, often seemed the most introspective of the three brothers. While Barry exuded confidence and Maurice brought energy, Robin possessed an emotional depth that translated into every note he sang. He wasn't just performing music. He was living it, breathing it, becoming one with every lyric that passed his lips. By 1967, the Bee Gees had returned to England and signed with Robert Stigwood, a decision that would catapult them to international stardom. Their early hits like Massachusetts, To Love Somebody, and Words showcase Robin's extraordinary vocal abilities. His voice could convey heartbreak with such authenticity that listeners felt every ounce of pain, every whisper of longing. Critics described his tone as ethereal, otherworldly, capable of reaching emotional depths that few singers could touch. But success came with a price, and the first cracks in the Gibb brothers' relationship began to show. In 1969, at the height of their initial fame, Robin made a shocking decision that would haunt the band for years. Creative tensions had been building. Arguments over who should sing lead vocals, whose songs should be featured, whose vision should guide their direction. Robin felt overshadowed, believed his contributions weren't being valued as they should be. So he did the unthinkable. He left the Bee Gees and embarked on a solo career. His first single, Saved by the Bell, soared to number 2 on the UK charts, proving he could succeed without his brothers. But the victory felt hollow. The harmony, both musical and familial, was missing. His solo album, Robin's Reign, failed to capture the magic that existed when the three brothers sang together, and by 1970, Robin returned to the fold. His solo experiment, a painful reminder that some things are meant to exist as a whole. The reunion marked the beginning of the Bee Gees' most extraordinary transformation. Throughout the early 70s, they experimented with their sound, moving away from their Baroque pop roots towards something funkier, more rhythmic. Then came 1975, and everything changed. The brothers discovered falsetto, that high, ethereal vocal register that would become synonymous with their name. Robin, Barry, and Maurice locked into a new creative groove, writing songs that pulse with energy and emotion. Jive Talkin' became their first American #1 in years, signaling their comeback. But nothing could have prepared them for what came next. In 1977, film producer Robert Stigwood approached the brothers with a project that would reshape popular culture itself. He was working on a movie about Brooklyn disco culture and needed music that captured the era's pulsating energy. The Bee Gees retreated to a chateau in France, where in just one weekend, they wrote most of what would become the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack. Robin contributed his distinctive voice to classics like How Deep Is Your Love and Stay Alive, songs that didn't just top the charts, they defined them. The soundtrack sold over 40 million copies worldwide, spending an unprecedented 24 consecutive weeks at #1. At one point in 1978, the Bee Gees had written and produced 6 consecutive #1 singles, a record that stands to this day. They weren't just successful, they had achieved total cultural domination. But fame of that magnitude brings its own unique pressures. And for Robin, those pressures manifested in his personal life in ways that would eventually become explosive. In 1968, Robin married Molly Hullis, a secretary he'd met through Robert Stigwood's office. She was his anchor during those turbulent early years, the one who believed in him when self-doubt crept in. Together they had 2 children, Spencer, born in 1972, and Melissa, born in 1974. From the outside, they appeared to be the perfect family, but the reality was far more complicated. The Bee Gees' relentless touring schedule meant Robin was rarely home. Months would pass where his children barely saw him, where Molly raised Spencer and Melissa essentially as a single parent. The distance grew, not just physically but emotionally. Robin threw himself into his music, using it as both an outlet and an escape. When he was on stage, when he was creating, the complications of his personal life faded away. But they never disappeared, and by 1975, his marriage to Molly had deteriorated beyond repair. They separated, beginning a divorce process that would turn shockingly dark. What happened next remains one of the most disturbing chapters in Robin's life, one that his family has tried to bury for decades. According to FBI documents that surfaced years later, Robin's divorce from Molly became poisonous, fueled by what investigators described as intense jealousy and drug-fueled paranoia. The situation escalated to such a degree that Molly's divorce attorneys, Edward Heyman and Melvin Walters, reported Robin to the FBI after receiving what they believed were death threats. The attorneys claimed Robin had made ominous statements suggesting he wanted them eliminated, that he'd even discussed hiring someone to make them disappear. The FBI opened an investigation in 1981, taking the threat seriously enough to create an official file. For months, federal agents looked into whether Robin Gibb, one of the world's most famous entertainers, had actually conspired to harm his ex-wife's legal team. The investigation revealed a man spiraling, caught in a web of substance abuse and irrational behavior. Friends from that era later described Robin as being in a very dark place, using cocaine heavily, making decisions that bore no resemblance to his usual thoughtful nature. The FBI ultimately closed the investigation in March of 1981, when Molly and her attorneys declined to press charges. They wanted the nightmare to end, wanted to move forward without dragging the scandal through public courts. But the damage was done. Robin's children, Spencer and Melissa, were young during this period, shielded from the worst details, but they couldn't escape the reality that their family had imploded in spectacular fashion. By 1980, Robin's divorce from Molly was finalized, and he was free to move forward. But the emotional scars ran deep. He became someone he didn't recognize, someone capable of thoughts and actions that horrified him in moments of clarity. Yet just when it seemed he might be lost forever, Robin found salvation in an unexpected place. Her name was Dwina Murphy, and she would become his second wife, his creative muse, and the person who would stand by him through scandals that would have destroyed most marriages. Robin met Dwina, an artist and author, in 1982, and they married in 1985. Dwina wasn't like anyone he'd known before. She was spiritual, eclectic, unafraid to live life on her own terms. She described herself as a druid priestess, embraced alternative philosophies, and brought a sense of freedom into Robin's world that he'd never experienced. Together they had a son, Robin John, affectionately called RJ, born in 1983. For a while, it seemed Robin had found peace, had created the stable family life that had eluded him with Molly. But Dwina and Robin's relationship operated under rules that most people would find unconventional at best, shocking at worst. They maintained what Dwina openly described as an open marriage. In interviews years later, she explained that she and Robin had a certain kind of freedom in their relationship, that they trusted each other enough to allow romantic entanglements outside their marriage. Dwina herself identified as bisexual and claimed she'd had her own relationships with women during their marriage. She believed this arrangement actually strengthened their bond, that by not imposing traditional restrictions, they loved each other more deeply and authentically. Robin, for his part, seemed to embrace this philosophy, or at least accepted it. He had what Dwina called flings, brief romantic encounters that were acknowledged and forgiven. The understanding was that these were physical, not emotional, and that their commitment to each other remained paramount. For years, this arrangement seemed to work, at least from the outside. But in 2008, everything changed when Robin crossed a line that even their unconventional marriage couldn't accommodate. Her name was Claire Young, and she worked as the Gibbs' live-in housekeeper. She was young, attractive, and increasingly, she became Robin's confidant. What started as friendly conversations evolved into something more, and eventually, Robin and Claire began an affair. This wasn't a brief fling or a one-night indiscretion. This was a sustained relationship happening under Dwina's own roof, with a woman she'd welcomed into their home. When Claire became pregnant in 2008, the situation exploded into a scandal that would follow Robin for the rest of his life. The birth of Snow Evelyn Robin Juliet Gibb in 2008 should have been a joyous occasion, but instead it became a nightmare of betrayal and humiliation. Dwina was devastated. All her talk of open marriage and freedom had limits, and Robin had shattered them completely. Having a child with another woman, especially their housekeeper, was a betrayal that cut deeper than any brief affair could. The media had a field day, painting Robin as a hypocrite and philanderer, while Dwina was portrayed as either a saint for staying with him or a fool for accepting his behavior. But Dwina made a decision that shocked everyone. She stayed. She later explained that she loved Robin too much to leave, that their connection transcended his mistakes. However, she did draw one firm line. Claire Young had to leave. The woman who'd given birth to Robin's daughter was essentially banished from their lives, forced to raise Snow on her own, while Robin continued his life with Dwina. It was a cruel arrangement, one that left Claire in an impossible position. She'd given up her career, her reputation, and her place in the Gibb household, and now she had a daughter to raise without the father present in any meaningful way. Robin attempted to provide financially. In January of 2012, as his health was failing, he arranged for £4 million, approximately $6.2 million, to be placed in trust for Snow and Claire. It was a substantial sum, but it couldn't replace his presence, couldn't give Snow the father she deserved. Robin's other children, Spencer, Melissa, and RJ, found themselves in a bizarre position of having a half-sister they barely knew, a child born from circumstances that tore their family apart. Spencer and Melissa, Robin's children from his first marriage to Molly, had already endured their parents' toxic divorce and their father's subsequent FBI investigation. Now they watched as their father created another fractured family, another child who would grow up knowing him primarily through his absence. RJ, Robin's son with Dwina, was perhaps most affected. He'd grown up in what seemed like a stable, loving home, only to discover his father had been living a double life under their own roof. The betrayal wasn't just Robin's toward Dwina, it was Robin's toward his entire family. But even as these personal scandals unfolded, Robin continued creating music. The Bee Gees' popularity had waned somewhat after the disco backlash of the early 1980s, but their legacy was secure. They'd sold over 200 million records worldwide, won multiple Grammy Awards, and been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1997. Robin's voice remained one of popular music's most distinctive instruments, capable of conveying emotion with a power that few could match. His solo work during this period reflected his inner turmoil. Albums like How Old Are You and Secret Agent explored themes of identity, loss, and searching for meaning. Critics noted that Robin's solo recordings, while not commercially successful as the Bee Gees' work, showcased a vulnerability and honesty that was sometimes obscured in the group setting. He was laying his soul bare, hoping listeners would understand the complexity of the man behind the fame. Then, in 2010, Robin received news that would change everything. He was diagnosed with colorectal cancer. The disease had already progressed significantly by the time doctors found it, spreading to his liver and kidneys. Robin, who'd survived so much personal turmoil, now faced his greatest battle yet. He approached it with the same determination he brought to his music, undergoing aggressive treatments, refusing to accept defeat easily. Initially, there was hope. Robin responded well to chemotherapy, and by 2011, doctors believed they'd beaten the cancer. He even returned to performing, giving what would become his final concert in February of 2012 in Germany. Video footage from that performance shows a man who was clearly unwell His face gaunt, his movements careful, but his voice remained remarkably strong. When he finished his last song and the audience gave him a standing ovation, tears streamed down Robin's face. He knew, even if the audience didn't, that this was likely his final bow. The cancer returned with a vengeance in early 2012. It had spread too far, become too aggressive to fight. In March, Robin underwent emergency intestinal surgery, a last-ditch effort to give him more time. The surgery led to complications, and in April, Robin contracted pneumonia and fell into a coma. His family gathered at the London hospital, expecting the worst. Doctors told him Robin's chances of waking were minimal, that they should prepare for the end. But in what his doctor described as overcoming incredible odds, Robin emerged from the coma after more than a week. He was conscious, lucid, able to speak with his family. For a brief moment, it seemed a miracle had occurred. Dwina, RJ, Spencer, and Melissa all visited, spending precious time with a man they come so close to losing. These conversations, these final interactions, are what Robin's children now describe as the most important moments of their lives. RJ, Robin's son with Dwina, later described his father's final hours with heartbreaking clarity. He spoke of sitting beside Robin's hospital bed, holding his hand, feeling the weakness in his grip. Robin, even in his diminished state, wanted to talk about his children, wanted to know they'd be okay. He expressed regret for his mistakes, for the pain he caused, for the complicated legacy he was leaving behind. He told RJ that family was everything, that success and fame meant nothing if you lost the people you loved most. It was a lesson learned too late, wisdom acquired through suffering. Spencer and Melissa, Robin's older children from his marriage to Molly, also had their final moments with their father. Their relationship with Robin had been complicated by years of absence, by the FBI investigation, by feeling like they'd always competed with his music for his attention. But in those final days, all of that fell away. They saw not a famous musician or a flawed man, but their father, vulnerable and afraid, wanting nothing more than to tell his children he loved them. Even Snow, Robin's youngest daughter, the child born from scandal, was brought to see him. She was only 4 years old, too young to fully understand that her father was dying, but old enough to remember this moment for the rest of her life. Claire Young, Snow's mother, brought her to the hospital despite everything that had happened, despite how she'd been treated. In that room, for a brief time, all of Robin's complicated relationships converged. His wife, his children from 3 different relationships, all united in grief. On May 20th, 2012, at 10:47 in the morning, Robin Hugh Gibb died at the age of 62. His family released a statement announcing his passing, following his long battle with cancer and intestinal surgery. The world mourned. Tributes poured in from fellow musicians, politicians, and millions of fans whose lives had been touched by his music. But for his children, the mourning was complicated by questions that had no easy answers. In the immediate aftermath of Robin's death, his will became public, revealing decisions that sparked controversy and hurt. Robin left his entire £26 million estate to Dwina and 3 of his children, RJ, Spencer, and Melissa. Snow, his youngest daughter, received nothing in the will itself, though the £4 million he'd arranged for her and Claire remained in trust. The exclusion felt like a final rejection, a statement that Snow wasn't truly part of the family despite sharing his blood and his name. RJ, in interviews after his father's death, addressed the Snow situation with frustration that had clearly been building for years. He stated firmly that Robin was not Snow's biological father, that despite rumors and Claire Yang's claims, his father had never been intimate with the housekeeper in that way. He suggested that Claire had manipulated the situation, taken advantage of his father's generosity and famous name to secure financial support for a child who wasn't his. These were explosive accusations, ones that Claire vehemently denied, but without DNA testing being made public, the truth remained murky. For 13 years, Robin's children maintained a public silence about these controversies. They attended memorial services, spoke at tribute concerts, shared occasional anecdotes about their father's musical genius, but they never addressed the deeper truths, the painful realities that shaped their lives. They protected his legacy, allowed the world to remember Robin Gibb as a gifted artist rather than a flawed human being. But silence has a weight to it, and eventually that weight becomes too heavy to bear. Now, 13 years after his death, Robin's children have begun speaking with a candor that would have been unthinkable just years ago. They're confirming rumors that had swirled for decades, admitting to struggles they'd previously hidden, painting a portrait of their father that's simultaneously more human and more tragic than fans ever realized. They speak of his kindness, his generosity, his ability to make anyone feel special with his attention. But they also speak of his absences, his addictions, his inability to balance the demands of fame with the needs of family. Spencer, now in his early 50s, has been particularly vocal about growing up as Robin Gibb's son during the height of Bee Gees mania. He describes a childhood where his father existed more as a concept than a presence, where phone calls from exotic locations replaced bedtime stories, where seeing Dad perform on television was more common than seeing him across the dinner table. Spencer himself pursued music, forming the band 54 Seconds and collaborated with other artists, perhaps trying to forge a connection with his father through the one language Robin spoke fluently. Melissa, Spencer's sister, chose a more private life, staying largely out of the spotlight that consumed her father. But she's recently opened up about the impact of her parents' toxic divorce on her childhood, about learning years later that her father had been investigated by the FBI for allegedly threatening her mother's lawyers. She speaks of confusion, the fear, the sense that her family was fundamentally different from other families in ways she couldn't quite articulate as a child, but understood all too well as an adult. RJ, Robin's son with Dwina, occupies perhaps the most complex position of all. He was a child of Robin's longest marriage, raised in what appeared to be the most stable of Robin's family arrangements. But he also witnessed the Claire Young scandal firsthand, saw his mother's pain, dealt with the sudden appearance of a half-sister under circumstances that strained everyone involved. RJ has followed in his father's musical footsteps, performing, producing, keeping the Gibb family legacy alive. But he's also been honest about the pressure that comes with that legacy, the expectation that he'll somehow fill the void left by his father's death. And then there's Snow, now a teenager, growing up knowing her father only through stories, photographs, and the music he left behind. Her mother, Claire, raised her largely alone, the promised financial support from Robin's estate being their primary connection to the Gibb family. Snow has remained almost entirely out of the public eye, protected by her mother from the scrutiny that comes with being Robin Gibb's controversial youngest child. But as she approaches adulthood, questions inevitably arise about what relationship, if any, she'll have with her half-siblings, whether she'll pursue her own place in the music world, whether she'll seek answers about the father she barely knew. What Robin's children are now confirming is that their father was a man of profound contradictions. He could write songs of breathtaking beauty while treating those who loved him with bewildering cruelty. He could perform for thousands with absolute confidence while feeling desperately insecure about his place in his own family. He could preach about love and connection while maintaining emotional distance from his own children. These weren't the traits of a villain, but of someone deeply wounded, someone who'd never learned how to reconcile his public persona with his private reality. They also confirmed that Robin's addictions played a significant role in his worst behaviors. The cocaine used during his divorce from Molly wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of substance abuse that Robin struggled with for years. The disco-era's excesses weren't just about fame and success. They were about escape, about numbing pain that Robin couldn't otherwise process. His children speak of times when they visited their father and found him in states they didn't understand as children, but recognized now as addiction's grip. Perhaps most poignantly, Robin's children confirmed that he died with regrets, that his final conversations were filled with apologies and wishes for different choices. He told them he wished he'd toured less, been home more, prioritized family over fame when it mattered most. He wished he'd gotten help for his addictions sooner, been honest about his struggles instead of hiding them behind his celebrity. He wished he'd been brave enough to truly know his children, not as extensions of his legacy, but as individuals with their own dreams and needs. These revelations don't diminish Robin's musical genius, or the joy his songs have brought to millions. How Deep Is Your Love remains one of the most beautiful love songs ever written. Stayin' Alive continues to pulse with energy that transcends generations. Robin's voice, preserved in recordings, still has the power to move listeners to tears. His contributions to popular music are secure, untouchable by personal scandal or family drama. But what his children are doing now is humanizing their father, removing him from the pedestal of celebrity and acknowledging him as a flawed person who struggled with demons he couldn't always control. They're confirming that the rumors were true. Yes, there was an FBI investigation. Yes, there was a love child scandal. Yes, their fathers' marriages were unconventional and often dysfunctional. But they're also confirming that Robin loved them, that despite his absences and mistakes, there was genuine affection, genuine desire to be a better father than circumstances allowed. The Bee Gees' story has always been one of family. Three brothers whose voices blended so perfectly they seemed to share one soul. But that family extended beyond Barry, Robin, and Maurice to include children, wives, and complicated relationships that existed behind the scenes. Maurice died in 2003 from complications of a twisted intestine, leaving Barry as the last surviving brother, and Robin's death in 2012 left Barry alone as the keeper of their shared legacy. Barry has spoken about the profound loneliness of being the last Gibb brother, of having memories and experiences that no one else can truly understand. He's also been diplomatic about Robin's personal struggles, choosing to remember his brother's genius rather than his failures. But Robin's children don't have that luxury. They can't just remember the good parts because they lived through all of it, the brilliant moments and the devastating ones, the pride and the shame, the love and the abandonment. What emerges from their testimonies is a portrait of a man who was, above all else, human. Robin Gibb wasn't a saint or a monster. He was someone trying to navigate impossible pressures while carrying wounds that never fully healed. The trauma of his toxic first marriage affected how he approached his second. The insecurities born from always being one of three brothers, never quite the frontman like Barry, never quite as easygoing as Maurice, shaped his need for validation outside his marriage. The addictions that took hold during the disco years' excesses became coping mechanisms he couldn't easily abandon. His children's decision to speak out now, 13 years after his death, represents a kind of collective healing. They spent more than a decade processing their grief, their anger, their confusion about who their father truly was. They've compared notes, shared memories, tried to piece together a coherent understanding of a man who showed different faces to different people. And they've reached a point where silence no longer served them, where the weight of untold truths has become heavier than the potential backlash from revealing them. They want the world to know that they love their father despite everything. Spencer and Melissa loved him despite the years of absence and the FBI investigation. RJ loved him despite witnessing the pain his infidelity caused his mother. Even Snow, who barely knew Robin, carries a kind of love for the father-shaped hole in her life. But they also want acknowledgement that their experiences were real, that the pain they endured was valid. That being Robin Gibb's child came with costs as well as benefits. In sharing their stories, Robin's children are also reclaiming their own narratives. For too long, they existed primarily as footnotes to their father's biography, mentioned in passing in articles about the Bee Gees, but never centered in their own right. Now they're saying, we have stories too. We have truths to tell. We are more than just Robin Gibb's children. They're individuals who built their own lives, pursued their own passions, survived their own struggles, and they deserve to be heard on their own terms. The music industry has a long history of excusing the personal failings of talented men, of separating the art from the artist in ways that erase the real harm caused to real people. Robin's children aren't trying to cancel their father or destroy his legacy. They're simply insisting on truth, on the acknowledgement that genius and cruelty can coexist, that loving someone doesn't require pretending they were perfect. It's a nuanced position that resists easy categorization, and perhaps that's precisely why it's so important. As we look back on Robin Gibb's life from the vantage point of 2025, the picture becomes clearer and more complicated simultaneously. He was a gifted artist who helped define an era of popular music. He was a troubled man whose personal demons caused immense pain to those closest to him. He was a father who loved his children, but struggled to show it consistently. He was a husband who believed in unconventional arrangements but crossed lines that destroyed trust. He was an addict who battled substances that amplified his worst impulses. He was, in short, thoroughly human. The confirmation of rumors by Robin's children doesn't change the music. To love somebody still resonates with aching beauty. Massachusetts still evokes a haunting nostalgia. Night Fever still makes people want to dance. But it does change how we understand the man who created that music, adding depth and shadow to what was previously painted in bright, uncomplicated colors. And perhaps that's okay. Perhaps it's even necessary. Because the alternative, maintaining a pristine, sanitized version of Robin Gibb that ignores the reality experienced by his family, serves no one. It doesn't honor his memory to pretend he was someone he wasn't. It doesn't help his children to have their experiences dismissed or minimized. And it doesn't give fans a truthful understanding of the person whose music they love. Truth, even painful truth, is ultimately more valuable than comfortable fiction. Robin Gibb died on May 20th, 2012, but his legacy continues to evolve. Every time one of his songs plays, every time his children share a memory, every time someone discovers the Bee Gees for the first time, Robin's presence remains in the world. That presence is more complex now than it was 13 years ago, enriched by honesty even as it's complicated by revelation. His children's decision to speak out, to confirm the rumors that had swirled for so long, is an act of courage and expression of love. Love for their father, despite everything, and love for truth above all else.